Thanks for downloading this episode from Teachers Talk Radio. You can find the full schedule and listen back to all our shows at ttradio.org. Enjoy the podcast.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Teachers Talk Radio. This evening we are having a really special one-off Teachers Talk Radio show, looking at what maths may look like in 2030. I'm joined by an absolutely fantastic panel, so I will let them introduce themselves. As you can see, Neil has got OCR there in his title. Neil, can you tell us more about your job at OCR?
Hello, good evening. My name's Neil. I'm a subject advisor working for OCR in the maths team. I've been with OCR over a decade now, and the role basically involves me helping to support our maths qualifications, primarily GCSE Maths. That might be more specialist teacher support, creating resources, delivering training, but also kind of getting involved in qualification development as well when we're going through those times, as we're starting to think about now, certainly.
Brilliant. And we've also got Neil's colleague, Amy. Amy, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Amy and I'm also a maths subject advisor at OCR, so doing the same job as Neil. I've been with OCR for about a year and a half now, and before that I was in the classroom as a secondary maths teacher.
Beautiful, thank you. And last but by no means least, we've got James. James, could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, hello, my name is James Butterworth. I'm a former head teacher and current head of maths at Truro School in Cornwall. And I also work as an LLME for the Code Maths Hub, leading the Core Maths Pedagogy Work Group.
Beautiful. And just in case I haven't introduced myself either, so Kathryn Clark, I have until very recently been out working for a maths education charity, but now been back in schools for a few weeks, so back in the trenches with all of you. And tonight I've been let loose on my own with no Tom Rogers as support to host this chat. With all of the things like Neil's just mentioned going on in terms of the curriculum assessment review at the moment, we thought it would be really nice to speak to OCR about what they think the future of our GCSE Maths qualification would look like. So I'm going to start just there. So why now? And what's going on in that education landscape that's making you think about it? Amy, can we come to you first?
Sure, yeah. So I think Neil kind of hinted at this, but there's been quite a lot of talk recently, not just from us at OCR, but from plenty of people in the maths space, just sort of thinking that, we've had this GCSE Maths now for quite a long time. There are some issues that people have been talking about, some things that could be done better. And with the curriculum and assessment review launched late last year by the current government, it just seems like a really timely point to be talking about this and to be listening to what teachers actually want to come out of any potential changes. So we've been doing some work at OCR more widely about this. Neil, did you want to pick up a little bit about the Striking the Balance report that we put out recently?
Yeah, sure, no problem. We put together a report chaired by Charles Clark throughout most of last year. So that looked at a variety of aspects of curriculum and assessment. Did take a specific look at maths though, so that kind of helped, kick off some of the thinking that we've been having over the last couple of years. That report was published last autumn. It's available online, so if anyone just does an internet search for OCR Striking the Balance, it should pop up, along with kind of various summary pages as well if you don't have time to go through the whole thing. But that had a specific focus on a number of angles of assessment, particularly though looking at Key Stage 3, but also GCSE, and it took some particular time looking at GCSE Maths as well in the research. So that's also kind of been happening alongside our own thoughts about GCSE qualifications.
Well, James, coming to you then, what are the biggest challenges facing you in the classroom right now, and how does that, I guess, link to the curriculum issues that Amy and Neil have been asking teachers about?
I think there's probably two key parts to this. I think the first one is about making the maths feel meaningful and relevant amid a curriculum that still leans too heavily on, abstract or outdated content. And when you look at the recent Maths Horizons report, it highlights the disconnect between school maths and how maths is used in the real world. And I feel like that really resonates deeply. If students don't see the relevance to maths, then we lose them. And then the other part is around the use of AI and technological tools that we have. Everyone's got a phone on the calculator. We're no longer the gatekeepers of calculation. So it's about how do we teach students to question, to interpret, and to reason, not just about manipulating numbers.
Yeah, nice. Amy, is there anything that you guys found in your kind of talks with teachers that add to anything that James has just said?
I think so, yeah. We're really hearing the similar sort of things, particularly when it comes to this idea of having maths be relevant and maths be future-proof. There's a lot of, I think, scrutiny on what's currently in the maths content for the GCSE, because I'm sure you guys have heard it as well, but it's a really full curriculum. It's, you've got to work to get through it in the time that you've got in schools usually. And there's been some real question marks over some of those topic areas, I think, about whether or not they are relevant, especially like James said, we can't gatekeep calculations anymore. They've got the tools, technology has advanced. Is there still some relevance to some of the things that we've kept in the curriculum? Maybe not. This is a really good space, I think, to discuss this and ask some questions about it.
Yeah, I think now would be a really good time as well to remind the audience that if they've got anything they want to contribute to this conversation this evening, they're more than welcome to. We're live on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and over on X. So if you want to send any questions through or any comments on anything we're saying this evening, now would be a really good time. You've got a captive audience in us four at the very least. If you want to get some semi-expert opinions, I reckon. So we've kind of picked up on that kind of real life and relevance kind of side of things. What I guess is the GCSE in maths trying to do with that real life element now, and also what do you see that being in the future? Neil, I'll come to you on that.
What do we want it to be in the future? So, I think we've alluded to some of these kind of things already in the previous responses. It's understanding, I think a particular one is kind of the relevance of technology, AI, and figuring out, what exactly do we want, what role do we want those things to play in, a qualification, as technology advances. We've heard various calls for, students to be working on spreadsheets and things like that in exams, but we know obviously many schools just simply don't have that capacity, that infrastructure as well. Calculator technology is changing all the time. We know that at the moment in GCSE Maths, we've got the requirement for a non-calculator paper. Do we want to continue with that, or do we think that students should just be learning how to use a calculator more effectively, and then which calculators, the ones on their phone, things like that? So these are all very much, things that we're really thinking a lot about at the moment, and, very keen to hear as well other people's opinions. Financial maths as well. I'm sure, we may well be discussing that a bit more as the conversation goes on today, but there are quite a few calls at the moment. Well, there's kind of a competition between people that are talking about, maths is, a beautiful subject and a language, and we want to, talk to students about that, teach them about all the amazing, wonderful things that, the content does allow us to show. Then there are other calls for kind of, maths is not fit for the current century. We should be much more future focused and looking at all these kind of things about technology and, financial things. And it's kind of finding the balance between those two so that we don't, completely throw the whole qualification out, but at the same time, we make sure that any future GCSE Maths qualifications do continue to be relevant, to have a purpose, and to serve the wide range of students that GCSE Maths qualifications currently do.
You mentioned that kind of a love of maths there, and I also think there's probably like also the kind of links to other subjects as well. I'm going to come to anyone who feels like they've got a bit of something to add on this one. Like, how do we feel like the GCSE in maths currently fits in, and we want to change that going forward in terms of other subjects and also that love of the subject. James is nodding away with me, so I feel like he might have something. But Amy's unmuted. Let's go to Amy first.
Okay. Sorry, James. Please.
No. Oh, sorry, Amy. Before you do, we've just had a question through from an American listener who asked what GCSE stood for. The GCSE is the General Certificate of Secondary Education. It's the exams basically that are taken in England and a couple of other kind of British countries where they take it at age 16. To help them get on to further study before they then do more exams in their A-levels and hopefully go on to something like an apprenticeship or maybe over to university. But Amy, sorry, I'll let you pick up on love of maths.
That's okay. I think that the biggest thing about maths is that it's such a wide cohort that you're hitting. Everyone at 16 is expected to sit GCSE Maths and, are expected to get a grade 4 as a minimum before moving on to a lot of things. So it really is sort of like that gatekeep qualification. And that makes it incredibly difficult to make sure the qualification is a success for everyone, because we've got all of these aims, and some of them sometimes do feel a little bit like they're competing with each other. If you think about this love of maths and what sort of topics would you pick to sort of instill that love, is it going to be things that are really relevant to their future life, such as financial maths and figuring out a mortgage? Maybe it is, maybe it isn't, but how can we make it all balanced and work with each other, I think is a really tricky thing. And I think it is important to highlight, and this is something that was released by the interim curriculum assessment review, that actually where we stand right now is that GCSE Maths is incredibly useful for a large amount of students who can take that knowledge and go on to perhaps, an A-level in maths, if that's what they want to do in future, that it's providing them with a really broad, deep amount of knowledge in that sense. But we just have to think, how can we improve it to make it a really good experience for everyone?
Yeah. So James, how does this affect you kind of day to day in the classroom? Like anything in particular that is resonating there, maybe specific topics you think hit those real life love of maths or the subjects particularly well?
Yeah, I think, being a little bit biased here with the work that I've done with teaching core maths, it really struck me when the students were saying, I wish we got taught this earlier. Why wasn't this covered before? And actually we thought, this is such a valid point. Let's actually embed it into our year 7 to year 9 curriculum, making the work with percentages applicable. So we've built into our scheme of learning now this idea that personal finance actually just exists within that, as the data interpretation as well. So students are now coming in with an understanding of what tax is, what interest rates are, what budgeting is before they sit their GCSE. And you get that, I think there's a couple of ways to spark that love and enjoyment with maths. And for some students, it's about being able to solve a problem, isn't it? And the satisfaction that you get in maths, that you can get something right, you can check that you've got the answer and got it right straight away. And there's this other part where you can see the relevance. I can see why I'm going to use this in day-to-day life. I can see why I'm going to use it in the next 5-10 years' time. And I think the ability to bring that into the curriculum and those real-life contexts, especially those rooted in personal finance, I think are going to be really powerful moving forwards.
Well, I think my next question was about how we serve all students for those different post-16 pathways. Amy kind of lent into that a little bit in terms of kind of how at the moment that interim report did say, for many students, it's doing the job, it's getting them to their next steps. Neil, is there anything you'd want to add to that?
I think we've kind of gone over things. Yeah. It's just ensuring that we think of that, qualifications are typically developed by looking at the level above and figuring out what that level above needs. So you look at kind of what university education needs in order to develop A-level qualifications. You look to A-level qualifications to determine what you want GCSE qualifications to look like. But I think particularly in maths, because as we've said already, we have such a wide-ranging cohort with it being a compulsory subject, and the percentage of people that take GCSE Maths that go on to do A-level maths is relatively small. So, we're wanting to perhaps bring the focus back to consider what does the whole cohort want, rather than necessarily just redeveloping GCSE Maths based on what we hear A-level maths needs, which has perhaps been done on occasions in the past. And so we're keen to maintain that focus on the whole cohort of students here.
I was just going to say, do you want to add to that, James, based on your comment particularly about core math?
Yeah, I think there's also a part around, it feels like we've got it right for students at the top end, and I think we've got it right for students as well, perhaps at the bottom end as well, with the alternative qualifications that are available. But I think because we've got this binary split between the foundation and higher tier, I think it's too blunt, and that we have a large group of students that are perhaps, stuck in the middle, like a forgotten middle. And I know it's been talked about before, but, I feel that there's a real desperate need for the reintroduction of the intermediate tier, and having that would help raise confidence, reduce fear, would create this and foster this greater love of learning for maths. And I think that would really help. Although we've got the two different approaches, it does very much feel like there's this like one size fits all model, and having that back in, I think, would then help alleviate some things that Neil's referring to about that small proportion that go on to take A-level compared to the whole cohort that are doing it. We have great qualifications in place for those who want to study maths post-16. The A-level maths, the A-level third maths is great. Core maths is exceptional for those who want to, who want to continue with their maths. But I think we're missing something for those students in the middle. And the reintroduction of the intermediate tier, I feel, would really help those students.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capelprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads. No distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. Eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
Yeah, I was thinking particularly about students that maybe choose to go on to do more vocational courses as well. Something in the middle might be something that's a little bit more suited for them to kind of have a greater level of mathematical kind of understanding for whatever they choose to do kind of vocationally. But maybe, they don't have to have done all of the content on the higher tier to be able to achieve their aims there. And the more supportive kind of qualifications you mentioned possibly don't cover that for them either. Okay, I think I'm going to scoot on because my next question was basically the one that you just answered, Jane. So well done. You're all reading my mind tonight. I'm very impressed with you. So the next one is about the challenges designing qualifications like GCSE Maths. Neil, I'll come to you first on this one. What challenges do you face when you're looking at creating it?
I mean, again, I'd probably say that we've gone some way towards answering this already. I mean, I think for GCSE Maths, it's, a particular challenge is, the wide range of the cohort, and, it's not a subject, it's not a qualification that students are selecting to study. It's one that, is a compulsory subject with such a wide body of students taking it. That has been something that's been really focused on in, previous qualifications. But perhaps we want to really ensure that that's being brought in now. There's always been a lot of work, prior to sort of really starting off with qualification reform, working with Ofqual, working with the DFE, putting together sets of, guidelines and the rules and regulations for developing qualifications. I think, the challenge has always been ensuring that everyone's heard in that, because there's always a lot of particular voices that are coming through, perhaps from more higher levels, but it's ensuring that the people on the ground, the people that are actually delivering these qualifications, really get to have their input into these qualifications. And I'm sure we don't need to tell anyone that's listening into this that people teaching have almost zero time to be able to contribute to all this and get involved in the conversation. So that is a particular challenge, ensuring that we can get everyone's voice heard when it comes to qualification development time, because there has been consultations, and there's always been the option for people to get involved in this kind of thing whenever reform has come about, but getting those responses in, and that that's part of what we were kind of wanting to speak about today when we were encouraging people kind of comment, put any questions or queries or any insights you've got into the comments or the chats here, just kind of trying to get the ball rolling with this kind of this conversation and trying to build it, bring everyone in.
That was going to be my next question. If there was someone listening that has a particular viewpoint they want to get across, and they're not in this chat with all four of us right now, what can they do to get in touch with you, particularly you guys at OCR? What's the best way for them to get in touch with you and give their feedback?
So I mean, just the standard contact details for the team are on the OCR website. So that would be just maths@ocr.org.uk. That's the email address, or get in touch with us on social media, and there's the phone number on the website as well. That's generally the best thing. We are always incredibly happy to sit down and talk with any teachers to get their feedback about either the current qualifications, be it question papers, resources, support, training, etc., or being much more future focused and having a conversation about what topics work, what assessment objectives work, what formulae should students remember or not remember. So that's always the kind of thing that we're really keen to do. Teachers might have seen that we've been running a post-exam survey very recently, getting their thoughts about the recent exams as well. And I'm probably going to bring in Amy here as well, because she's been doing a lot of great work on one of our insight platforms. So I'll bring in Amy to talk about Recollective, if you're happy to do so.
Yeah, so we always have an OCR teacher panel, but since the kickoff of all of this conversation around reform, we've created individual teacher panels for maths, English and science now. So if you are a maths teacher, or even anything teacher who happens to teach a lesson of maths once a fortnight and has some experience with it, we'd really love for you to sign up. It's just a website where we share some surveys, and you can just log in for 5 minutes and answer some questions. We use it sort of to get an idea of future support that might be required if we're redeveloping the specification. Ideas of what content does need to stay, what content do you think needs to go, and then as things sort of snowball a little bit, we're hoping to also be able to share some of the things that we've been working on, so maybe some draft ideas of questions or things like that, just so that you guys can feedback before we take that idea any further. And also, speaking about this, talking about challenges around designing qualifications, it's really important for us to consider what teachers can do. There's no point us, doing a really big redevelopment and then making teachers do lots of work to be able to then figure out how to teach it again, because we already know we're in a situation in the UK where we're really not there with the amount of maths specialists in the classrooms, and the teacher recruitment is still not hitting the targets. And we know more and more often there are non-specialists coming in and teaching maths. So we want to be able to make sure that any changes that are made are supportive of the people that, you know, have to go on and deliver it, and it needs to be realistic.
Brill. Amy, just if someone wanted to join in with kind of those specific panels, how can they get involved with that?
Yeah, so there's plenty of links to the teacher recollective panel. I'm not quite sure if you Google it will show up straight away, but we've definitely posted about it in social media recently. And Kathryn, does it work that when this is finished, wrapped up, we can tag you guys in it with a link to the panel?
Yeah,
absolutely.
Do. I'll make sure it gets out, and I'll make sure Tom makes sure it goes out on all of the TTR socials as well. I've seen a few links being shared through LinkedIn for that panel actually, so it's really nice to hear a little bit more from you about what it's about. James, thinking about the changes that have happened previously, and obviously we still call this, I don't know whether you do as well, but quite a lot of people still call it the new curriculum, even though it's not that new anymore. So anything that the recent-ish change in GCSE Maths directly impacted your teaching or the students' learning?
So I think some of the way that the questions have been structured for students to be able to answer, I think, has been quite an important and has a positive impact shift on how students have been able to access the questions. With the shift of the focus with the different AOs for the papers, I think that's been very much welcomed, as well as then the resources then that are being provided for both the students and for the teachers to help the delivery of the content, especially like you made reference to there. I think, you know, most maths departments in the country now have got some form of somebody who isn't a necessarily qualified maths teacher, but has worked really hard to make sure that they can deliver the curriculum. And there has been a greater emphasis and creation of resources, I think, to help staff with that, not just through the exam boards as well, but I know there's been some great stuff that's been produced by the NCETM recently, you know, around a mastery for maths, both Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 as well. And these are really powerful to sort of encourage you as a practitioner to reflect on what we're teaching, why we're teaching it, and the best way that we teach it to support students. And I think that, you know, the changes have encouraged a reflection in how we deliver. That's been really powerful.
From the OCR side then, how do you feel like are there any things that you do as OCR, either like thinking about particular topics or ways of examining, that you kind of approach any of those things in the qualification? Neil, I'll come to you.
I'm perhaps going to pass this more on to Amy, because I think it's the sort of thing that she's been having a really focused look on, and I don't want to kind of...
No, not at all. Feel free, Amy, go for it.
Take away from some of the work that she's been doing.
Is this in terms of what we've been hearing in terms of what needs to be changed and what needs to be looked at, Kathryn?
I think just thinking about, James mentioned there about kind of the things in the current curriculum, I had the structure of the assessment objectives, the resources that have been kind of made available from you guys to support the curriculum. What are you guys doing to help with anything there? And what do people want from that in the future? Yeah,
so obviously we keep saying new, but it has been around for quite a long time now. But we, from the start, we wanted to make sure we had the resources out there to prepare teachers and to make sure that, you know, they felt ready and reassured that all of the material that we're giving to their students had actually been, you know, checked over by the person running the qualification, so us. So it's all relevant. But we still hear quite a lot of demand from teachers when it comes to, you know, those little changes that happened at reform. I'm thinking particularly the assessment objective changes that put a much bigger problem solving. So we do still hear teachers coming to us and wanting more guidance on how problem solving is assessed and what are we looking for when it comes to testing those skills, how can they best prepare their students for it. So we do make sure that we run CPD sessions that take the time to deep dive into our exam questions to help teachers make that link between what they're doing in the classroom to, you know, what that looks like in the assessment side.
Yeah, I think the assessment objectives, particularly like 2 and 3, are quite hard to get your head around when you haven't got concrete examples. So it's really nice to hear that OCR are like taking that kind of directed from teachers that they want to know what that looks like and are able to help us a little bit with that. I think it's probably going to be the age old issue, no matter how much you produce for us, unfortunately. Though problem solving is just a weird thing to get your head around. What is a problem? We could probably talk about that for about 3 hours, never mind what we've got left. So I'm going to come back to James. So now thinking more about topics rather than kind of the generalities of the qualification, what topics do you think the students find most engaging or challenging in the current curriculum, and why is that?
So in terms of engagement, I think lots of things with real world meaning. So we've mentioned before about personal finance, but if we're looking at probability in sports or gaming, interpreting data from social media, looking at the amount of misinformation that's out there as well and getting them to understand that, or health research. And then I suppose, money is still a really engaging topic for students, something that involves money or something that involves decision-making or real consequences. Students enjoy working out their future take-home pay or comparing credit card rates or analysing sports stats. So I think it's because these topics are seen as useful. And this idea of usefulness is a massive driver of motivation. And then on the flip side, you've then got when students don't understand why they're doing something, they struggle to see the value. So if you think about perhaps some topics that are a bit more abstract with no immediate application, like circle theorems, for example, is one where students really struggle with. And there is a question about, well, actually, is a topic like circle theorems still relevant actually in the curriculum?
I quite often come against this one for things like constructions. I totally see their value mathematically. I think they're like a beautiful piece of mathematical history, but have a ruler now, not just a straight edge. So technologically, we've come even further than the ruler now. So is there something we can do to make that kind of thing a little bit more relevant to our students? I'm going to come to you, continuing, James, for this one before I pop over to Neil and Amy about what they think. We talked about the overcrowdedness of that curriculum to an extent. It's very full. And is there anything that you would get rid of that's out of date, or anything that you think you would add in instead of what's in there at the moment?
So I would, like you said, constructions would be one that I'd look to remove. Circle theorems would be one that I'd look to remove. I'd be prioritizing how we interpret data. So a removal of some of the procedural topics, but how do we do this? Looking at financial literacy as well. I suppose it'd be looking at topics that have got real world problems that isn't just Evelyn's looking to repaint her bedroom, not those type of real life questions, but ones that require real thinking, that have real impact as well. It was really interesting. I was thinking back to a talk that I went to many years ago. There's someone from Wolfram there talking about how actually, because students have got access to these calculators, we actually can be exposing them to more higher order thinking, some more complex maths. It's all about can they interpret? Can we get them to become decision makers and critical thinkers? Because lots of technology and AI now is doing the heavy lifting for us. So it's looking at how we can introduce more of that. So it's what I'll be thinking about.
Yeah, I think that's the kind of thing I definitely was thinking about when I took the GCSE statistics course for a little while, and like a lot of that then seeped into my teaching of the kind of GCSE Maths course as well, because I knew that was the bit that was going to be more relevant for them on the day-to-day. This is just before I move to ask Neil and Amy if they've got any opinions on this one. Just a reminder, if you want to contribute to this conversation, we're across all socials. So if you want to get involved, maybe tell us what you want to remove or add on to the maths curriculum from your perspective. We're on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook and X. Amy, anything you would like to see kind of added, removed, maybe something you think should definitely stay?
I personally have plenty of opinions, but one of the really good things about being part of OCR is that we kind of get to be in the middle of a lot of discussion. So we hear a lot from teachers and feedback from teachers and actually students. I ran a student focus group yesterday, so I was speaking to some of them about what they liked and didn't like. But we've actually got all the data as well, so we can see, student performance across all of these topics to help us sort of pinpoint, where are people performing well, what are they struggling with, and then we also do lots of research and speak to lots of people out in the field. So thinking about constructions as one of the topics, we spoke to someone with a background in architecture about it, because it's like, okay, when are they going to need to be able to do really accurate pencil drawings? And I was thinking to him, he was like, well, the thing is if they get to the point where they're sketching like that, we need to teach them how to use the computer software to do it anyway. So it's kind of an idea of, okay, wait, maybe things have moved on. And I think constructions is one of the ones that we hear the most from teachers, that they're just, not only is it one that students really find difficult in terms of relevance, it's a topic that takes up considerable amount of time in the classroom, when it comes to weighted against other topics. And it's also, I remember from my time in the classroom, it's tricky planning and executing a good constructions lesson. Like first, you've got to make sure you've got 30 protractors ready and 30 compasses. And yes, they all need pencils as well. And yes, they need to be sharp pencils. So it's just like... And
all of the compasses have the perfect kind of amount of tension in them so that they're actually useful.
Exactly. You carry a screwdriver around ready to sort everyone out in the lesson. And then there you go, that's 40 minutes of your lesson gone. So it's about actually thinking not only about the topic as it stands, but holistically within, what's going on in the classroom, where's the usefulness coming, and what barriers is it presenting? Like, we know that there are issues when it comes to sort of equal access to all, and if we've got students who are struggling coming to school, struggling with their equipment, struggling with having enough lunch, do we really want them to be like, don't forget to pack your protractor and your pencil and your ruler for every lesson? It's just like, what can we do to make sure that we're not creating barriers that are unnecessary? I think another point in that kind of conversation, students who are not, let me get this right, who have SEND and struggle when it comes to things like, gosh, the words come out of my mouth, but having something like exact trig values in the course where they're going to have to do a lot of memorization there, is that really fair on all students when we know that there are certain people in the cohort that are going to find that really difficult? Is that needed, especially when we do have calculators now in everyday life? Do they need to memorize these numbers? I think that's another really common one that we hear from teachers. Neil, is there anything else that I've missed? I feel like there definitely is.
I definitely think that we've kind of covered the major ones. So yeah, definitely constructions. Definitely for me, the recall of trig values on the current content is not really required, and as Amy rightly says, it's kind of not an easy thing for many students to remember. I'll perhaps go a bit beyond that in terms of the requirements of the current specification to have memorized particular things, and also put on the list of things to perhaps not be in future qualifications is the requirement for memorizing particular formulae. Now, at the moment, we do know that students are going to be getting the formula sheet at least until 2027. So that has perhaps already been heard kind of at the DFE off-qual level, that maybe those elements of the content are perhaps not really needing to be in GCSE Maths. Yes, students have got to be experienced and be competent with using the formulae, but memorizing the quadratic formula and the sine rule, cosine rule, etc., perhaps something that I would be, considering removed.
You're taking away one of my biggest achievements when I was in GCSE there, Neil. I could just recite the quadratic formula, but nobody's business.
Yeah. Well, I could still do it now, and it just seems ingrained from that GCSE learning that I did years ago. But
I totally understand what you're saying, though, that not all students need to memorize that, and if you want to, you still can. No one's stopping you.
And once again, thinking of the reality of day-to-day world right now, students have just got a phone in the real world that they would always be able to look up these formulae. Just memorizing that just doesn't seem in keeping with the current times. I thought James made some really fantastic points about particularly statistics and the way that we work with the content. At GCSE, we're still kind of requiring students to calculate mean, calculate medians, actually perform a lot of these tests, and really I think the skills that we need to be in possession of much more in the modern world is our ability to understand these tests and use them to be able to compare and contrast data sets. And core maths is doing this really well at the moment. That has been able to have that shift away from getting students to do, just the calculator work, but has introduced students to just having a much greater focus on being able to interrogate data sets, make comparisons, understand how things work, figure out kind of just what isn't sound when it comes to data. So that's something else that I would highlight. There's two more things I would just quickly say. Simple interest is perhaps one that I might be encouraging to leave. Compound interest, yes, I think that has a lot of real world applications and is very useful to understand, but we know that a lot of students get confused between simple and compound interest, applying often applying one when they should be applying the other, and simple interest perhaps has limited real world applications. So that might be another one. And then finally, just kind of, in addition to thinking, what content might we want on, what content might we want to take off the content, there's also tiering. There's also which elements of the content sit on both tiers. So there's also kind of the debates about, what should be higher tier only, what do we really want both tiers of, students to be studying. And I think trigonometry is one that, continues coming up with teachers. A few decades ago, that was higher tier only. Currently, it's on the both tiers, content requirements. Is there, a rationale for it being on the foundation tier? We can see that a lot of students are really struggling with it. Would it perhaps be better set only to higher tier students? I think that's kind of, one of the things that we're looking at now. I think, we all have our individual opinions about that, but I think where we're going with now is kind of looking at some of the data, looking at the performance data
and the trends. Yeah,
exactly. And, just encouraging this conversation with as many people as possible for trigonometry, but also, other things as well.
Okay, James, you may have answered this question already, but I'm interested if I confine you to one thing. What would you change if you could only change one thing about the current curriculum? What would it be and why? So that's James, that one's for you. One thing.
If I could change one thing, I'd have a greater emphasis on financial literacy.
Okay, yeah, I had a feeling that might be what you were gonna say, but I just wanted to double check.
Yeah.
So we've kind of talked a little bit there about kind of the content of the course and a little bit about tiering, but it would be interesting, I think, to talk about kind of the ways of assessing as our next point. So is there kind of anything that we could do to change in the future? Maybe, I know at the moment we're very exam heavy in terms of all of our qualifications. Is there anything we could possibly be doing in maths, thinking about kind of non-exam assessments or anything along those lines? Amy, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of where our strengths are, you would expect, as the examples. So we have done quite a lot of work looking at this. One big thing that we did recently is we did a research piece about how much assessment do we actually need? So what we did is we isolated the scores for across, the 3 GCSE papers, what grade did they get? And then we looked at it again. Okay, if they only sat 2 of the papers, would they have reached their same grade? I think it was it was 85% of cases, students got exactly the same grade. And then in 99.7%, they were only off by 1. So, it's quite strong evidence there that maybe we're over assessing. Maybe 3 papers at a total of 4.5 hours. That's a long time to be sat in an exam hall doing maths, especially if you're a student that's struggling or doesn't particularly like maths. So if we can do it better, let's try and do it better. Another thing, thinking about stats and working with data, we've had quite a few conversations with people from the Royal Statistical Society, and they're really keen on utilising NEA and actually utilising technology to make non-examined assessment more workable for, maths education today? Because we know from in the past when NEA has happened that it's been a really big drain on teacher workload in getting it done and marking it. And there was some big concerns as well from people who looked at the standards of that and were, really worried about making sure that there wasn't malpractice happening, that everyone was graded to the same level. And it's a lot of logistical challenges. But there are definitely stakeholders out there, like the Royal Statistical Society, who are really keen to see if we can do something with digital assessment there just to make it a much more viable solution. And I really can see where they're coming from, because like James said, we've all got access to that sort of technology. Do they need to be doing the procedures like they are now, pen and paper in a test, or do they need to be given some data and, make some conclusions from it, be able to draw information out of it? Or conversely, can they do the stats to verify these conclusions that have come out of the data set? And something like NEA or project work would be able to, assess that in a way that pen and paper exams currently struggle with.
We have had a comment in that kind of, and I think you've almost answered this, so it might be that you can just kind of tag on to the end here. And we've had a comment through from Adam Boxer, who's basically kind of asked us about the comments we made about kind of the memorization, and also us saying, maybe the students don't need to do these calculations like finding the mean and the median, etc. Quite so much, but kind of worried about whether we're asking students to think mathematically when they're not doing the maths, to kind of almost like get that knowledge in the first place. So I guess would you see, with the way you've just talked about kind of the kind of project work and things, how would you see those two things being balanced?
So there's a really interesting thing here, because I definitely agree that students need to be able to know the procedures inside out so that they can reason with it. It skips a step if we're expecting them to only be able to draw conclusions. But having, recently properly deep dive into the Key Stage 3 national curriculum and then the Key Stage 4 GCSE specifications, there's actually a really big overlap right now. I think something like 40% of the GCSE is just Key Stage 3 specification points that are pretty much word for word. And if you think about core maths is currently about 80% GCSE material, but what they do with it is all that interpreting and all of that, reasoning with it. And so what would be brilliant is, in a world where, the content demands weren't so high, the pathways were a little bit more better defined, teachers could be embedding those core skills when they first show up in Key Stage 3, and then at GCSE we can extend that and properly show the students, this is what we're doing for, this is what you're aiming for, you're learning it here and you're going to learn how to use it here, which would make sense to them, and then they would buy into it.
Yeah, agreed. Anyone want to come in on that comment from Adam, just to add anything at all before we move on a little? No. Okay. I'm going to come to you about kind of some of this Amy's alluded to, James, about kind of the non-exam assessment kind of coursework way of thinking. What kind of things do you feel are effective or problematic with that for like you as a teacher, but also for your students?
I really liked what Amy was talking there about, alluding to about providing them with with unseen content that they then need to apply their mathematical understanding to. I think that's where, instead of necessarily having an NEA, but perhaps questions that are built into the paper that develop that, very similar to the type of questions that exist within core maths, where how you choose to present the data, for example, it is up to you. But more emphasis on that interpretation, I think, would be really powerful, because I think currently there is a reliance, isn't there, on these terminal exams, which are very demoralising for some students. I think a change to that would be really powerful. And also alongside that, with when we think about progression to maths post-16, the way that the assessments are currently set up, if you look historically, I think at the grade boundaries for a grade 7 across the different exam boards, it's around the 50% mark. And if you think that we're saying that this is the benchmark for students to study A-level maths, if we've got students who are getting half a paper wrong, but we're saying that they're good enough to study maths further, something doesn't quite seem right. So I think, what Amy's talking there about how we can perhaps reframe some of these questions that are in the GCSE paper would be, as a practitioner, would be a really welcome response.
Okay. We've actually answered my next question as well, which is about kind of content across tiers. So I'm just going to give you an opportunity to add anything to that you wanted to. Neil mentioned it a little bit earlier. Is there anything that maybe Amy or James you want to add to this idea of content being split across tiers? What works, what doesn't? If not, I'll move on.
I guess I'll say that something that I hear often from teachers is just they really want to stress the point about how different the 14 to 16 maths experience feels like. If you're a student sitting foundation versus a student sitting higher, it can be almost like a completely different course in terms of what you're seeing in the exam paper and how you feel coming out of it. And then that leaves teachers in a really tricky position deciding whether to put their grade 5 student into foundation for the better experience, but potentially more difficult, grade boundaries if it comes down to that, or putting them into higher and actually trying to stretch them to reach, a higher grade. And it is something we have heard for a call of intermediate tiering to come back, like James mentioned earlier, and particularly in response to that. And the tricky thing is again, huge cohort. We've adapted the content in foundation and higher to try and make it suit the learners, so that they're not, really overburdened by things potentially if they don't need to, or vice versa. But then that makes the friction between switching tiers even more difficult. So it's again balancing how can we make it a slightly more bespoke qualification, but still make it easy for students to, attain where they should be attaining.
Over 7,500 primary schools are already using Capel Primary to boost confidence in teaching foundation subjects. Our expert-created curriculum planning, lessons and CPD are here to support and upskill you, whether you're a subject lead or classroom teacher. If you've got knowledge gaps in art, music, computing or beyond, we've got you covered. Head to capelprimary.com and empower your teaching today.
Need a smarter way to teach? Wish your lessons had more impact? Eduflix.com. Stream educational films for teachers and students in or out of the classroom. Keep students engaged. No ads, no distractions. Try it free for 30 days at eduflix.com/try. Use code TTR. Get 50% off all orders made before June 1st. eduflix.com.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishers of professional development books and resources that support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Don't miss out. Level up your professional development today and visit johncattbookshop.com to explore the full range of titles. Use the code JCTTR2425 for 20% off your order. Happy reading.
And that challenge is something that we see. It's something that we see, those conversations all the time about, if you've got students who are on that borderline, which tier do you go for? And quite often it comes down to, where does your passion lie? And if your passion actually lies and exists for some reason outside of maths, that actually, we quite often talk about, doing the foundation tier allows you hopefully to then invest time in those areas that you're perhaps more passionate about. And you feel you get that. We quite often see that enjoyment. People go, I'm really enjoying my maths again because I'm now doing papers where I'm getting, 70, 80% of the paper right compared to struggling and battling to get some of those marks. And like I say, I think the intermediate tier's got a real place to really bring on and infuse some of that love for maths for a big proportion of students in the country.
Yeah, I think we talk quite heavily when we have teaching and learning conversations about how success breeds motivation, breeds success, breeds motivation, etc., etc. And I do feel, particularly for those students on the borderline, it's a massive thing. If you go into you're a grade 5 student and you go on the higher paper, you can get there's a huge amount of that paper that you're not going to be able to access to get the grade that you are at, but that doesn't make you feel successful. It just makes you feel like I can't do 3/4 of this paper very well. So yeah, it's a hard one, isn't it? And it's like that kind of battle that everyone has forever. I'm going to, we've got a question here. So Brian has asked us, what's our opinion on A-levels? He took AS Maths and considering A-levels, but it's not very fun. Brian, you've come to the wrong place if you don't think maths is fun. Anything anyone wants to say to Brian before we move on to the help that you guys can give teachers?
I just to say that I could spend a whole hour talking about A-level maths as well when it comes down to it. But Brian, my advice would be to persevere, because there's a lot of, if you're talking about an English exam board, there's a lot of good stuff that comes up in year 13 that kind of makes year 12 make sense, especially when it comes to the pure topics. So if you feel like you're doing all right, persevere.
Yeah, I would stick with it, Brian. It's a difficult A-level. There is absolutely no doubt about it. It's also chock-a-block full of content, but it's absolutely worth it. When it all starts to come together in year 13, I would definitely stick with it personally. Anyone else want to add anything for Brian before we talk about your resourcing to help teachers? No, okay. So James, I'm going to come to you. Can you tell me a little bit about the support from the exam board, so like from OCR, that you use in schools, and kind of what makes the biggest difference to your day-to-day teaching?
So it's definitely where we've got those, clear contextualized practice questions, worked examples, the examiner reports as well. I think they're very powerful and often overlooked as well. But I think if you're working with your teams, getting your maths department to have a look at those examiner reports, I think there's quite often some real key insights there that massively help. And alongside, if you can get someone in your team to mark for the exam board as well, the information that they get from there is absolutely golden as well.
Yeah, Neil, we talked last time, I think, that we spoke on TTR about how valuable those examiners' reports can be. Is there anything else that you provide that is really like practical and accessible for teachers over at OCR?
Well, hopefully everything that we provide is practical and accessible.
Well, let's use it let's use this time as a real good plug for OCR, Neil. What are you offering?
Yeah, I mean, this could be a whole radio session in itself. There's a huge amount that we provide. It's everything up from kind of like little classroom activities, topic tests, worksheets, guidance on kind of, as James was mentioning, worked examples, different sets of questions. We've got a whole variety of different tests, check-in tests, section tests, topic tests, variety of those things. We definitely produce examiner reports. We kind of supplement those as well with candidate exemplar documents as well that are really, huge, wide-ranging reports that come out after the exam series, showing, all the different kind of responses that students make, and, highlighting any particular misconceptions as well. But also really useful if you're, if you've done any of the papers as just a mock exam, and you're, marking it, and you just want to get a feel for how particular responses have been marked. Various different adapted question papers. So we publish alternative papers. I know that some people call those shadow papers as well, but we call ours alternative papers. And then kind of mini question papers as well, we publish as well. So sort of half-size question papers that can support, the grade 1 to 4 students on their journey towards, a full-length 90-minute paper, and then also half-size question papers for the grade 4 to 5 candidates. Perhaps if anyone is, unsure about which tier perhaps to enter students for, they can give a bit of extra insight as well. There's a huge amount else that I haven't mentioned as well, schemes of work, delivery guides, etc. But that's a 2-minute pitch on what is available.
Amy, has he missed anything?
Yeah, so no, he hasn't missed anything. Well, in the sense that there's so much, I don't think you can list everything, but I just really want to highlight how closely we like to work with teachers when it comes to producing our resources. So, for example, we were getting calls from teachers to be more supportive when it comes to, kicking off that revision process for the lower ability students, for lower attaining students. And one of their requests was just an accessible intro to revision. So we put together these 1 to 2 mark mini question papers, like Neil was saying, just to give them a really realistic place. You're starting with an exam question, but it's only 1 or 2 marks. And then we've also spoken to people from NCETM who are like, we really want some more connection here between the exam board and what we're doing in the classroom when it comes to, approaching maths with this mastery approach to teaching. And so that's something we've got a resource for that in the works right now. Hopefully will be coming out in September. So, what you say to us really does impact what gets created. So please do reach out to us if you feel like there's a need, if there's something missing.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. It's really great to know that this comes through every single conversation that I've had with you guys at OCR so far, that you really want to hear from the teachers and you want to do the best to help them. So I think that will be another kind of welcome thing for those teachers that are tuned in to hear. We did just have a little bit of a banner pop up while we were chatting saying there were 700 people tuned in live, so thank you so much for that, and hopefully we'll have even more when we start to look at those people watching back later on. I also want to point out that we have had a response to our conversation here from the great Dylan Willem, who has joined in with our on a section we were talking about before about memorization, particularly with regards to like the SEND students. So kind of just highlighting that that's an incredibly complex issue, and we need to be thinking about that even if they don't know something as simple as a multiplication factor, that memorization is actually really useful. So thinking about those things we're saying we should memorize and shouldn't really carefully. But thank you, Dylan, for listening. It's an absolute honour that you've taken the time out of your evening to join us. So James, I'm going to pass over the baton to you now. Is there anything that you'd like to ask Neil and Amy while you've got their exclusive attention this evening?
So you've talked loads about how you involve teachers in the review of the qualifications. And one of the things I'd like to ask is, so what role does student voice play in shaping the future of qualifications?
Yeah, a really big part. We collect student opinion through teachers because we know students love to tell their teachers exactly what's going on. But we also run a student panel. I think we've got one of my colleagues is always out and about talking to students, not just about maths, but just generally how they feel about education, how they feel about qualifications. And when we did our striking the balance report, one of the things that sort of separated us from other similar reports is that we didn't only go out and talk to loads of teachers, but we also ran a concurrent student survey that got just as many responses, and we collated all of that. And we have a student board that works with us and they come in. So yeah, we know that the people who are most affected by a qualification are the ones that are learning it and the ones that are teaching it.
And what are the key things that they're saying, and does it chime with what the teachers are saying?
Yeah, most definitely. You really hit the nail on the head when you were talking about the real life aspects. But it's also really interesting. Like, we spoke to a lot of students who had sort of graduated, sat their GCSE Maths 2 or 3 years ago, and they look back at it and think, oh, if only it had been, like, now that I'm past it, I understand it, but if only it had been the use of this qualification, the use of these skills had been explained in a clearer way to me when I was 15 or 16. I wish I had that. And it is really interesting and useful to hear those kinds of, reflections.
Thank you very much. I'd be really intrigued to know what those conversations are like with the students. I imagine that the ones that are coming to you guys are maybe not the ones that are just saying, like, when am I ever going to use this? But that is probably the conversation that James and I probably have the most issues and battles with on a daily basis. I'm going to be an electrician. Why do I need Pythagoras? So I don't know. I'm not an electrician, but you might. So I'm going to get you guys just to round up for me with like a key kind of takeaway or hope for the future of the GCSE Maths. I'm going to alternate here. So Neil, I'm going to start with you, and then we'll go to James as a teacher and then to Amy. What is your biggest hope or takeaway for the future of the GCSE Maths qualification?
I mean, I'm just kind of like building off what we've been saying and what I sort of said at the start. I just, really hope that we can develop a qualification that, gets, the teacher voice behind it and the student voice as well, to bring in the previous conversations. That perhaps has not always been the case previously, certainly to the degree that we would have wanted. And that is just, focusing on developing a qualification that is for everybody, for all students, regardless of ability or SEND or just across the board, not just building something that is for those going on to do A-level maths, but gives everyone a qualification that sets them up with the maths that they need for life.
Beautiful. James, how about you? I think Neil really summarised our conversation perfectly there, but anything that you're doing as well.
I suppose I just hope that we move towards a curriculum that empowers all students with maths they can use, not just maths that they can forget after an exam. And, bring in more of that core maths style thinking earlier, reintroduce the intermediate tier and accept that, students don't need to memorise everything a calculator or AI can do, about just creating opportunities for them to interpret, to question the maths and apply it to real life.
Lovely. Amy, anything to add to our two incredibly good summaries of our conversation?
Yeah, I've drawn the short straw here for having lasted this, I think.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. I think a key takeaway for me from this conversation is just that I'm feeling quite reassured from hearing, from you and from what James is saying, that, we're on the right lines. We're asking, I think, the right questions about what's going on. And I just love being able to put the work in and being able to make changes, hopefully, down the line. And, like James said, get that qualification that really empowers all students.
Brilliant. In that case, I'm going to round us up for this evening. Thank you guys so much for all of your time. And thank you so much to those of you that have tuned in or joined our conversation through any of the social media. Please go and check out everything that OCR have got to offer. As Neil said, the bit that he kind of plugged was only a very small fraction of what they're offering to teachers to help support them with the GCSE. And try and find that panel link so that you can we'll try and make sure it gets out to you as well, so that you can speak to Amy and tell her all the things that you're interested in. And other than that, have a lovely evening, guys, and thank you so much for your time. I'm sure we'll speak again soon.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.